In December 1954, a small group of devoted followers gathered in a suburban home, staring out the window, waiting for the end of the world. They were certain a massive global flood was coming, and that an alien spacecraft would descend at midnight to carry them to safety. Midnight arrived. The sky stayed quiet. No spacecraft appeared, and the ocean stayed right where they were. The followers sat in silence, stranded in a reality that directly contradicted everything they had staked their lives on. Logical consistency suggests a clear path forward here. These people should realize they were scammed, abandon their faith, and go home embarrassed but wiser. But the group did the opposite. Their leader announced that their impressive devotion had convinced God to spare the earth. The believers felt a sudden surge of joy, took to the streets, and immediately began recruiting new members to their cause. Psychologist Leon Festinger infiltrated this group as an undercover observer, setting aside the cult's prophecies to focus on a deeper human phenomenon. He wanted to document how the mind responds when its most cherished beliefs collide with a brick wall of evidence. Festinger called this friction cognitive dissonance, the severe psychological stress occurring when cherished ideals slam into an incompatible reality. To resolve this, the brain subconsciously changes behavior, updates beliefs, invents justifications, or simply builds a wall to deny facts. Because admitting we are wrong threatens our fundamental sense of self, the human brain frequently chooses to unconsciously bend reality rather than update its own internal map of the world. In 1959, Festinger tested this theory at Stanford. He brought students into a lab and forced them to perform an agonizingly dull task, turning wooden pegs on a board by a quarter turn, over and over for an entire hour. Then, the researchers asked the students to do them a favor. Go to the waiting room and tell the next participant that the peg turning was incredibly fun and exciting. For telling this lie, half the students were paid $20. The other half were given a single dollar. When later asked how they actually felt about the task, the $20 group admitted it was boring, but the group paid only $1 insisted the peg turning was highly enjoyable. The students who received $20 had a sufficient external reason to lie. The cash justified their behavior, so they felt no internal pressure to believe the lie themselves. The $1 group faced a direct conflict. They saw themselves as honest people, yet they had just lied to a stranger for almost nothing. That choice contradicted their own self-image. To resolve that stress, their brains subconsciously altered their own memory. They convinced themselves they actually enjoyed the task. If they liked the work, they weren't liars, they were just enthusiasts. This pattern of self-deception appears whenever we exert effort. In another study, students had to pass an embarrassing initiation, reading a list of severe obscenities aloud, just to join a campus discussion group. Once they passed, the researchers let them listen to the group's conversation. By design, the discussion was made banal, dull, and entirely pointless. Students who had a mild initiation correctly identified the group as a waste of time, but those who suffered the extreme embarrassment rated the boring discussion as fascinating. Realizing we endured humiliation for nothing is too painful to accept. To protect the ego, the brain artificially inflates the value of the goal to match the suffering required to reach it. We continue this process today, often to justify our most harmful habits. Consider the internal conflict experienced by a regular smoker. When presented with medical evidence that their habit is lethal, the smoker faces a massive spike of dissonance. They want to survive, but their daily actions suggest otherwise. Rather than quitting, many smokers reduce the tension by adding risk-minimizing beliefs. They might claim the science is exaggerated or point to a relative who smoked for decades and lived to a ripe old age. This also drives the meat paradox. People who deeply identify as animal lovers experience an intense clash of values when confronted with the reality of consuming meat from factory farms. We resolve this by mentally downgrading the intelligence of the animals we eat, or by dissociating the living creature from the food on our plate. We live within an endless process of the brain generating excuses to protect us from our own contradictions. The brain utilizes cognitive dissonance as an essential stabilizer, prioritizing psychological equilibrium over objective truth. Because this drive for consistency is a universal human constant, it can be repurposed as a tool for change. Psychologists use a technique called the induced hypocrisy paradigm. This intervention is designed to trap a person's behavior against their own stated moral beliefs. A subject is asked to publicly advocate for a positive behavior, like safe health practices. Immediately after, they are forced to list the specific times they personally failed to follow those rules. This mechanism scales to high-stakes behavior because the biological need for consistency remains the same. When an extremist is forced to repeatedly confront the gap between their violent actions and their own stated moral values, the tension eventually outweighs the ideology. Clinicians use this weight of sustained hypocrisy to create the mental friction required for a person to walk away from radicalized groups. When the psychological pain of confronting our own hypocrisy is made inescapable, the cheap excuses fail. At that point, the only way to restore mental balance is to actually change our behavior. Recall the last time you were presented with raw data that completely contradicted your political worldview or a habit you hold dear. You can likely remember the physical sensation of that moment. The hot flash of discomfort in your chest, the sudden defensiveness, and the urge to attack the source of the data rather than process the information. The next time you feel that tension building, recognize that your brain is preparing to deceive you. You are standing at a psychological crossroads. You can endure the temporary discomfort of updating your beliefs to match reality, or you can let your ego take the wheel and twist the world to fit your illusions.